Hey there, it's Chris from Good Roads, and I'm waiting on some parts to come in for the backyard rope tow, so that project's on pause for the moment, which means that I have the opportunity to share an even more exciting project that I've been working on, and I am so stoked to finally show you guys. A little while back, the team over at Roarockit reached out about collaborating on a deck kit. It's my goal here at Good Roads to get as many people as possible making their own boards, so developing a mold and deck shape that I believe in, that you guys can use to start pressing your own decks, is really exciting. And having it available as a prefab kit from one of the biggest names in the DIY skateboard hobby will make it widely available, easy to get your hands on, and lower the barrier to entry for people looking to make their own boards. That is a win-win-win. There are 3 other shapers participating in Roarockit's Collab program: Bo from Open Source Skateboards, Matt Berger, who wrote a beautiful book called The Handmade Skateboard, and Reverie Woodworks. And we're going to be adding a ton of variety to Roarockit's pre-shaped kit offerings. As for my contribution, I'm going to be designing a Freeride Longboard deck. Roarockit sent me 2 decks worth of veneer and 2 blocks of their mold foam so that I can prototype my kit and develop a really good shape for you guys. So let's get started on some product development. I did a bunch of research into the Freeride decks available on the market to understand what people are looking for in that style of board, and I also took a bunch of measurements off the decks that I have in my quiver so I can get a sense of what different concaves and kicktails feel like and what I think would work for this style of board. I decided to try a 36-ish inch double kicktail deck with a 24-inch wheelbase, and with that plan in mind, I can start laying out my mold. I always like working from a center line when designing board geometry, so I laid one down. And I also gave myself a midline to help keep my nose and tail symmetrical. Next, I measured out my wheelbase and dropped some lines for reference. From there, I measured out the length of my kicktails. I haven't decided 100% on the length of the kicks, so I left myself a couple options. This is just a general idea of where I might go with this shape. I'm not going to need the whole length of the foam block for my mold, so I also marked where I'm going to cut it down. The next thing I need to figure out is where the transition of my kicks are going to start. I'm using a set of old faithful Randall R2s for my reference trucks because I need to make sure my transition starts far enough out that the area under the base plate of the trucks is nice and flat. With the nose and the tail taken care of, I can start laying out the concave. I'm going with a medium concave with about 3 inches of flat in the middle. And here's the part of this deck where I start to challenge myself and start to try to make something for you guys that's a little above and beyond. I want this kit deck to have wheel flares. It's a piece of deck geometry that feels really good underfoot, it reduces wheel bite, and it's a great feature to have in a Freeride deck. But because of some of the limitations of pressing with a vacuum bag, curves like wheel flares can sometimes be difficult to do without the use of additional clamps. My goal for this collaboration is to try to design a mold that works with the constraints of vac bagging to give you nice wheel flares right out of the box without needing any additional hardware. I grabbed my reference truck and loosened the kingpin so I could push the hanger down and get an idea of where the flares needed to go. And with those marked, I've laid out all the aspects of my deck. Next, I've got to transfer those dimensions to the sides of my mold to start planning the 3D shape. First up, the kicktails, which for my first iteration, I'm going to keep pretty mellow. Then I marked the concave and the depth of the wheel flares. The transition from the kicktails to the wheel flares to the concave needs to be organic and smooth, so I made myself a template. That way I can be sure that my curves are consistent throughout the mold. One thing to note, the flares I've designed here would work with a 2-part mold and a high poundage press, probably no problem, but I expect to have some trouble getting those exact curves in place with a vac bag. One of the awesome things about being able to prototype is I can use whatever goes wrong in this first version as a reference to get better results in my next iteration, and that's what I intend to do here. I cut my mold to length, mark the last lines for my nose and tail, my layout is done. That's an awful lot of lines to keep track of though, so before I start carving, I went through and marked all the parts of the mold that I need to remove. That way, I have to do much less thinking while I shape the foam. Then it was time to get carving. This is my first time using the foam from Roarockit instead of the insulation foam that you can get in a home improvement store, and I like it. It carves nicely, seems a little more stiff than the stuff you can get at a Home Depot, for example, and it seems to hold details a little bit more sharply. I found that this foam reacts better to a coarse rasp than a microplane. With insulation foam, this particular rasp is usually too aggressive, but with the Roarockit foam, I'm able to remove material quickly while still getting accurate lines. Different tools for different materials, right? And there we go. That's a nice looking mold. So let's put it to use and press a blank. For the first version of this deck, I'm going with a 7-ply layout, a bamboo sheet on the top and bottom with birch in the middle. I'm curious about how the characteristics of these woods will play out in the flex of the deck, but I'm not sure that this is going to be my final decision on wood choice for this kit. I rolled glue onto all the faces of my veneer, tacked my stack into place on the mold with some painter's tape, and slid it into the vac bag. I peeled the backing off the sealing tape and sealed it up. Then I tried something that I learned about just recently. It turns out you can remove the top of the valves on these bags and use any vacuum with a hose attachment to evacuate a lot of the air, and let me tell you, it really reduces the amount of hand pumping you have to do. But we do need to pull a stronger vacuum than you can get out of a shop vac, so we have to switch over to the hand pump to finish the job. And my blank is pressed. Now I just gotta leave it in the bag for a day to let the glue dry. I'm gonna show you something real quick here about vac bagging. You can see here that I was right about that wheel flare curve being a little bit too extreme for the forces at our disposal with this method. But the bag hasn't been sucked in between the veneers and the mold. That would be a real red flag. Since the bag hasn't pulled in here, that says to me that even though I didn't quite get the mold geometry perfect, I'm actually on the right track. Good stuff. After a day of waiting, I came back and I tried another new to me thing about the Roarockit bags. Turns out you can just nudge this little thing here to release the vacuum, and that makes it much easier to get the bag open. Another tip for working with these bags, if you keep the backing and the sealing tape in the bag, it's less likely to get lost and you can replace it right away before pulling out your mold. I transferred my center line from the mold to the deck. And there we go. That's quite a nice looking blank. I want to adjust my approach to the wheel flares next time around, so I took some pictures for reference for where the mold and blank didn't meet up. That way I can try to close that gap in my next iteration. Otherwise, the blank came out great. The concave and kicktails all worked out just as intended. So, in the next video, I'm gonna design a shape for this prototype, get it drilled, get it finished, and do some test riding. I may not have gotten the geometry for those wheel flares quite right, but I can still get a feel for the concave, the kicktails, the wheelbase, the different woods and veneers that I used, and whatever shape I come up with for this deck. And that'll give me a ton of information that I can take back and integrate into the next version of this design. If you want to see that and a ton of other awesome DIY board sports stuff, you should go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That's exactly what we do here. If you've got questions or comments, leave them down below. If you like this kind of content and you want to support the channel, you can join this awesome crew of people who pitch in over on Patreon and who also have my eternal gratitude. And I gotta tell you, I am really excited about this one, guys. I am so stoked about the idea of getting one of my designs out there, available to you guys, so that you can take a shot at the awesome craft of pressing your own skateboard decks. So I will make sure that it's a good one. As always, I love having you guys along for the ride. Thank you to Roarockit for supplying the materials for this build and for reaching out about the collab. So until next time, I'll see you soon. It's gonna be a fun one. It's gonna be a fun one. Can't wait to see what you guys do with it.